Hey yo, welcome to the podcast, the Liberated Educators, where two brothers are ready and able sit at the table. It's Ken Sheldon, D. Linnea. Yeah, y'all, they doing this. They're purely intellectuals and equity enthusiasts, creating change by shifting the conversations critical.
Yo, what happened to our sound?
I don't know. I don't know. Yo.
Oh, did the sound go away when I
It went
We lost
away.
the music. It's like
I was vibing. I was ready. I know you gonna fix it up with the with the mix, but dang, I was like, yeah. Oh,
you know what that reminded me of? That reminded me of back in the day when you'd be at the club and you're not paying attention to the clock, and they start a track that's bumping, and you dancing, getting your groove on, and time to go.
Or you look down at your clock, you're like, oh, I'm gonna be in trouble.
Oh yeah, that was me a lot.
I gotta go.
Yep. And then you get the call from from your parents, like, where are you? Like, I'm down the block.
I'm right down the block.
No cell phone back then that could really tell you where you are, which is halfway across town.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So for the listeners, that is one of my favorite phrases in African American vernacular English. Where are you? I'm down the block. That literally can mean you all the way across town, by the way.
I'm just right around the corner. Right around the corner. Yeah. Which is adjacent to I'll be there in a minute.
Yep. I'll be there in a minute. How much time you need? Man, I'll be there in a minute.
Yeah. Good. What's good, brothers? What's good?
It's good. Good to be here. Thank you to the Gold Coast Q. And this is my kind of recording.
Yeah,
going
live recording.
Yep.
Live recording right now.
That means we can't make a mistake.
Nah, you can make a mistake. I'll edit it all out.
We are live recording, and then it'll be edited, and then it will be published again on the Liberated Educator.
Yeah,
as if there was like no problems. What happened?
I thought Brian had that, that little 20-second thing. So like, okay,
that little delay.
Yeah.
We always have plenty of them. Yo.
All right.
All right, so we got to get up in this. So we
have lost D.
What? Come on, we gonna have technical difficulties today. This is how it's going down.
No, that was actually me. My bad.
Okay, you gonna cut my mic off like that?
Hey, we did say Brian's editing.
Yep, I didn't even say nothing yet.
Go ahead, man. Go ahead. You got it.
Man, run that track back. No, I was playing. No, we just keep it going. So just saying, we've been part of the Rocksnard Gold Coast Q. I got to, do a couple of sessions, which has been good. We did the collaboration with the audience earlier today. We've been talking to Jay and with Mike and heard more about the student panel. So I feel like we got the goods to get the CPT rolling. What y'all want to do?
Sounds good to me. I apologize for missing earlier, but I'm glad to be here. So
time zones, we good. We're good. Glad you're here. I got to finally
in my time zone, but yes,
I know. I finally got to say some things. I got to get.
Okay. Look at you. Look at you. Yeah. Don't believe that. When we record, we have dialogue. If it sounds like I'm doing my talking, blame the editor for that, man.
Yo, all right.
Wait, but hold on. I do have to come back in. I've got to let everybody know something that we always tell our guests. Now that you can actually have a visual of what's happening during this conversation, Now, Ken, he has his full, head profile showing right now. But when he bows down and all you see is the top of his forehead, that means he's about to go in.
He's going in.
So get ready. All right. I'm off now.
Everybody be like, I see it now. And then they're going to visualize it when they're listening to the pod. They're like, he's leaning in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's actually cool, though. Yeah. Maybe for those that don't see this, when we record and they can't see it, I can say lean in time and then do it. But I like it better to leave it as an Easter egg. So when you listen in, you're like, I wonder if Ken's leaning in right now.
You know what's funny? When I play back the pod every now and then, I'll be like, what is that sound? But when I watch, like I watched earlier when we were recording live, I'm like, I do this number a lot. It's always funny when you play back things. You're like, I didn't realize to do that, but I realized when I'm starting to feel good, I start rubbing my hands.
Yeah.
You really did.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm rubbing my hands on a conversation topic because the students brought it up. It's something you and I always love to talk about, and that's conversations in the classroom, the importance of having dialogue with students. I even pulled up a couple of my favorite quotes. Paulo Freire says, the teacher is no longer merely the one who teaches, but one who is him or herself taught in dialogue with the students. Or shout out to just the wonderful, the beloved Dr. Arnitha Ball. Dialogical pedagogy is a theory and practice of teaching in which dialogue is central. Teachers and students are in an equitable relationship and listen to multiple points of view. So when we make conversation a central part of what education is, that's when real learning is happening. But, too frequently teachers want to pontificate from the stage, sit up there and act like they're experts on all things and have their kids jot down stuff and then regurgitate when it comes test time. So maybe we should talk about having conversations with our children.
I think we should, if I may add, because you mentioned Paulo. I would even add that the whole idea around what you just shared with conversations, one, connect to him. What's one of the 5 core principles of a critical consciousness? Humility. So see, you can't engage in a meaningful conversation if you're not operating from a degree of humility. One. And then with Dr. Ball, I will add, and this is something I bring up in a lot of my recent talks and in general, learning has to be relational, not transactional. If I'm the one doing all the talking and you're the one writing it all down, that's transactional. Relational is we're having dialogue around it. And I may know more to some degree, but again, the humility. Just because your students are younger than you does not mean that they know less than you. It means they know things that might be different. You may have a larger body of experience to where you have more depth of knowledge, but you can't know everything.
Without a doubt. Preach on it.
So,
I love how both Dr. Geneva Gay and Zaretta Hammond speak to, what's cultural within African tradition, within lots of Latin tradition, Latin American traditions, and that is having call and response, right? So this is something that we're used to. This is something that, and actually in Christopher Emdin, right, he talks about it in his book, as well as that banging talk that he gives on Teachers Make Magic. I know I'm brutalizing the title, but right, the whole, like how the rap artist captures the attention of the audience, how the Black pastor does it from the pulpit. This could be an hour-long sermon, but the entire audience is engaged. Why? Because we're actually having a conversation back and forth, in comparison to I'm lecturing you, I'm telling you things that you need to take notes on so that you can, again, banking process, regurgitate it when it comes test time.
Well, and I love how you dropped all those names, because ultimately what I would equate what you're sharing is, one, the identification of culture. What is culturally normalized for, let's say, you and I, where, like Chris Emdin talks about in his book, you got the barbershop, you got church, and quite frankly, you have a lot of other social settings that we growing up would have frequented. And how that, if you think in terms of conversations, connections, relations, you can't build a relationship if it's not conversational, if it's, again, the transactional piece. And so, for me, like he talks about in the book, and what ideally educators will begin to embrace is, how do I eliminate the hierarchy of the classroom and do it in a way that, yes, I have more content knowledge, but my content knowledge is only one piece of the bigger puzzle. And part of engaging in the right conversations, and I'm built into a specific crescendo with this. Part of engaging in the right conversations does three things. One, you can develop higher degrees of social capital in the fact that you have something to contribute, and that's big. Going back to the humility thing. Number two, I would argue that when students are afforded and empowered in the right spaces to be able to engage in the necessary conversations, whatever the topic may be, they develop a conversational terminology. Remember, a lot of people extract themselves from conversation because they don't know what to say. And then three, building on that, there's a reason why a lot of educators who want to, for example, engage in culturally proficient, anti-bias, anti-racist, any one of those things at work, they want to engage in it, but they're a bit reticent to do it because why? I don't know what to say. And that's why I share with them, the first thing you got to do is give yourself the permission and the grace to say, I may not have all the words or all the terminology, but I can at least articulate what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling. And then, of course, for the facilitator of the workshop, which is the way I roll, is perfect. Now, how might we use that as a building block?
Bro, can I kick it? Okay.
Yes, you can.
You just brought in so many things that has my mind spinning, man. So one thing that just came to mind is I gave a shout out to Dr. Ball without giving a shout out to Link, my place of enjoyment. There's always a difference and something that needs to be elevated, not just my place of employment, but my place of enjoyment. And Dr. Ball in her research was pulling back-to-back teen, and I was like, yo, this is just like Paulo Freire. And the thing that I loved so this is throwback for me. So my whole introduction to this thing called education and really thinking about it on deeper levels came from when I was in Dr. Nageta's class and critical pedagogy. And that one lab class that I had was so meaningful for different reasons, but a couple things. First being, it was different in the sense that, I'm just seeing people saying what's up, and I see Nadia, and I got to say what's up, because that's what we do.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna get Nadia's gonna get a big shout out when we get to the last topic.
All right.
Oh yeah, because I'm withholding that on purpose.
Yeah, there's certain people that can interrupt the conversation any day. That's one of them right there. That's what's up.
Yeah.
But it was so different because it was expected that we pre-read text and then come to class and just conversate. And I remember at first, like, this is awkward. And I was like, what's really the deal here? But then I realized, the more I read, and then when we had the conversations, I realized, we're actually living out what this critical pedagogy is supposed to be, which is having critical conversations. And this is the part where Dr. Ball highlights that's what she calls ideological becoming. So an educator comes into the room with their own ideology, their own thoughts, their own perspective on things. And it's only when they have a conversation with students that their perspective may be changed, meaning the teachers, the educators' perspective may be changed, not just because of the information and the perspective, but how they articulate themselves, like the ways in which the students show up and the realization, wait a minute, I may have to frame how I communicate differently in order for the student to understand what I'm saying, and I may need to change my position in order to understand how the student is communicating. I need to throw my assumptions to the side. So that what is formed after that is a brand new ideology because it was done in dialogue. It was done intentionally for that. That was point one. Point two, because I got hyped on this one and I'll calm down, was what Guy Kawasaki talks about. I was trying to pull it earlier. I think it's from his book Enchantment, but he talks about the rule of reciprocation.
Mm-hmm.
And so frequently and so often teachers feel the need to stand on the podium, to be the expert, to be the one who says, I know what I'm doing and I know all the things, and don't want to position themselves, like you were saying, in humility and even needing something from their students. But Guy Kawasaki speaks to when we actually learn something from our students and we actually gain something from our students, when we actually get something from them that we need and they recognize that, that's the law of reciprocity, and that actually trust is built. So if we ever have to come in and come correct on a student for something else, there's actually a real relationship there. And it's not just the law saying you shouldn't have done that. It's, yo, I expect different. I wish you would have done it this way versus that way. I got you, Mr. Lanier.
Right.
I got you, Mr. Shelton.
Well, it's aligned with the C, because what you just talked about is what I would identify as more of a compliance and conformity culture, since we're on C. But I do have to add, not a counter narrative, but an additive component to what you just shared.
Go.
I'm going to defend the educators that don't do that in the context of what is generally perpetuated and rewarded. The educator that says, you know what, I have content knowledge, but I'm going to learn from my students. And then when people go and the students are kind of the drivers of their learning, where there's no hierarchy in the class, what usually happens to the educator? They are called incompetent, incapable. They need more professional development, which, by the way, I hope everyone watching, let's start rejecting that. Think about that. And I learned this from my close friend, Tom Murray. Professional development. Who says, you know what, I'm a professional, I need to be developed? It's professional learning. Okay. Now, going back to what I shared, you're right. You have the individuals who do those things. But as you know, from my perspective and my purview, I'm looking at the systems and institutions and what I always call the habits of mind and cultural norms that reward the transactional. I'm the expert. What does it say about me if I admit that I'm learning something from my students? And how is that responded to? And it ties in with the P that we have coming up, because I think it's all part of that. It's all part of that cultural cycle that exists in education that needs to be dismantled. And I'm using the word dismantled intentionally. You hear a lot of the word disruption used. And let me explain this so everyone hears. Disruption is a word that you should reject. Yeah. Oh, let me lean in a little bit. Yeah. Disruption needs to be rejected. If you think about it, think in relevant context. What happens when a student is disruptive? You've got something you're doing. They change it temporarily, keyword. You make some adjustments or you do some things, and now you're back to what you were doing. So tell me again how disruption is a good thing in education. Now, dismantle. That's the only way. In some cases, dismantle, and honestly, in others, it's time for abolishment.
Yeah. Well, that's my follow-up, right? There's got to be a sequence. Like, we may be delineating or trying to define whatever the issue is, and then we go to deconstruct it or dismantle it, right? But if you leave it there, the problem is that people can pick it back up, piece it back together, and use it again. We've seen how old playbooks of the last 10 years, I was about to put it on last year, and then I was like, no, maybe 2 years, and I was going to put it back. No. At least the last 10 years have looked a lot like what it did in the 50s and 60s. Just label it red and call it liberal, and it can be easily discarded without actually having any form of critical conversation about the issues in which we're talking about. It's an old playbook. It can be put back together. It can be used again. But if we actually demolish it, then those pieces no longer exist.
Correct. Demolish it. And like Nadia put, there's no way to fix how racist, oppressive, and harmful our schools are. Nadia, thank you for putting that comment, because it's interesting where an educator who shall remain unnamed on the podcast, because I know Brian likes to bleep him out, brought up the fact that, education is not broken. And my whole thing is, first of all, if you were to ask me the question, is education broken? That is not a response that's in absolutes. I always argue it's both broken and doing exactly what it's intended to do. Depending upon who you are, race, gender, socioeconomic status, geographical location. In some cases, it's doing exactly what it's meant to do. In others, it's broken.
That's design.
By design. Yes. And so you can't disrupt bad design.
No doubt. Okay, what's the P? I feel like we need to make some progress on this conversation.
Yeah. Purpose. I mean, look, just to connect this to the conversations, I think ultimately we have to identify what is our purpose And if we don't understand that, by engaging in conversations with with other educators. And in fact, I got to add this because I have this in one of my keynotes. I always put it because hat tip to the late great Nipsey Hussle, may he rest in power. If you look at the people in your circle and you don't get inspired, you don't have a circle, you have a cage. Part of that having a circle is being able to engage in the conversations that you can align with your purpose. And here's what I would say to everybody here. If you can't clearly articulate what your purpose is, that's okay, because part of that might be engaging in those conversations in the first place.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is the piece of our podcast where we normally need to just have a yep soundbite, because Ken just drops knowledge, drops it like a bomb, and I have zero to say. So that's probably part of also the reason why I don't have much to say sometimes, because you just drop bombs on us like that. You're absolutely correct. The whole word purpose in education is, it's there's a duality to it, right? Mm-hmm. So there's, on one side, we can be critical and ask the question, like, so what's the purpose of all this, right? So we can be critical on one side of the coin and asking the question with intended critique. What's the point of this? On the other side is truly the opportunity, and that is to see there's deeper purpose and meaning that we could be ambitiously pursuing if we were actually to point out the purpose for which we are supposed to be doing whatever we're doing, right? So we can have meaningful engagement with our content and with our curriculum if we just seek out the purpose in which it exists within our society and ways in which our students can utilize it in order to become better individuals, for them to help identify what those things are, and not us like throw it on them and say, you need to know this because this, and the third, but them helping to form and shape some of those things. So right. Purpose, it's the critique when it's not there. It's the opportunity when we're pursuing it.
Well, here's one for you. And I think this is good for us to unpack a little bit in the audience. What is the purpose of education?
Well, okay, so this is.
I thought you were waiting for me to talk.
I thought you were for a second, but it's funny. Not a direct answer, but I remember crowdsourcing some stuff, and I did it on purpose, and asking educators, why did they get into education, and what do they, why did they become a teacher? What do they want to do with students? And like everything was around, want students to be better global citizens, like lofty words, some things we could be critical of, but ultimately was all great-hearted stuff. Like that was the reason why they said they were in it. And then I'm looking at, okay, so that's why you got in this profession, but what is it that we do? What is it that we're, to utilize what you help remind me of regularly, what is it that we're forced to do regularly in education? And are they a match? If we have, right. Compliant culture running rampant, and we have, high stakes testing is really the end game, right? If those are sort of the things that are ruling the day, I'm like, those don't match with why you said you became an educator. So what's up? What we going to do about this?
See, and this reminds me of a James Baldwin quote. In fact, I can pull it up real quick for this recording. The purpose of education finally is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself and to make his own decisions. Now, granted, there's the gender, but I'll rephrase it. The purpose of education finally is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for themselves and to make their own decisions, to tailor themselves. This is black or this is white, and to decide for themselves whether this is a God in heaven or not. And he also had another statement around what happens when you develop a consciousness of how you're being educated and the reasons why you're being educated. And I think ultimately for me, just to kind of add to what you shared, in the answer to the question, there's the social and historical context that defines the purpose of education. And then to me, there should be the contemporary rendition of it, which is to simply provide the opportunity for individualized empowerment within our social constructs. That's it. I should be able to freely determine what my path is, because my educational experience has provided me with a heightened self-awareness, and I have the access to the necessary resources to be able to pursue that next path with vigor. Now, we know that isn't what happens, which is where you get into the whole conversation around equity, compliance, conformity, indoctrination. I mean, all those words that we see used, but again, when you start to really examine it, I'll give you a prime example, because this conversation came up with a friend recently. And in fact, he sent me a TikTok video. Why is it that we still teach students mathematical concepts? And I'm not picking on math by any stretch, because I could talk about this with any subject matter. This is just the one that recently popped, that was recently said. Why do we still teach students mathematical concepts that for us as adults, we have never, ever used them, and we've never been in a context where we need to apply them? And further to that point, when I grew up, is the teachers always saying, you can't use a calculator. You have to perform your mathematical calculations in writing, when calculators exist. Like, what is the purpose here? I have a resource. I should be able to use this resource. You know how often I was told in high school, you can't have a calculator, Kenneth, because, what are you, when you get older, you're going to have a calculator with you at all times? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, actually.
By the way, and a computer, and this thing called Google. So tell me again why right. I'm learning, and again, not picking on math, but like, tell me again, why am I learning something like calculus? And I loved math, by the way.
Let's take it back even more elementary, literally elementary. It was something I dug out of the archive, because I remember being frustrated and thinking about this, how certain math word problems, right? Like, they can be formulated in such a way that they have no cultural relevance at all. Mm-hmm. Right? But we want our kids to connect to them. And actually, I would actually disagree with myself right there. I don't even think that we necessarily want our kids to connect to them. It's just like, we want to put this in a word problem form. And so here was an example, literally, that came out of a 4th grade word problem. It said, Brad has 500 pieces of candy. 295 of them are red and the rest are green. How many green pieces of candy does Brad have? And I looked at that and I was like, what's the point of this? Right?
Yeah, because it's a puzzle. Remember, you're the one who used to say that. Tell the audience this. You got to tell them.
I'm about to read it right now. So I looked up the definition, because I was like, first of all, this is supposed to be a math problem, right? That's the way it's stated. And it's
one. That ain't a problem if you got all that candy. That ain't a problem.
Yes, Kylie just wrote word problems, arbitrary way of practice. So I looked it up. Problem: a matter or situation regarding as unwelcome or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. I got 99 problems. A piece of candy ain't one.
Ain't one of them.
So
unless you go to your dentist, but yes.
Right.
Let me add one quick thing, because Colleen's point, word problem, arbitrary way of practice. Here's another one to add to what Colleen shared. And Colleen, by the way, thank you. You're 100% correct. Where they become even more damaging, and I would even argue insidious, is when the descriptions of those word problems lack any degree of cultural relevance. So, for example, me growing up, and probably many of us, remember that word problem about 2 trains leaving a station? At that point, when I got that problem, I had never been on a train.
Yeah. So there lies the problem, right? If a student looks at a word problem that's explained and it asks a question, and what if the student's response is, I don't know, like I have no idea what you're talking about, right? So I'm not trying to solve the problem. I'm trying to figure out what the heck you're talking about, right?
So what you're saying?
Or I don't care, which is the most fundamental. You know what? This isn't happening. So I have to actually care about this content and about my grade and all the other things that you assume that I actually care about in order to do this word problem, and to also catch on to all of the the language that oftentimes is coded, centered on a cultural familiarity that may be foreign to me, all those things. And so no wonder one kid is like, I got this. Because why? Because I can translate, I understand it completely, and this is relevant to me, and the values that are set on why I should be doing this in the first place, I'm in 100% agreement with. So you got that student on one side, and you have another student who may be fully capable of working out the problem, but they don't see it as a problem. They don't understand not the language per se, but they don't understand the relevance of it. They have no connection to it. And if their whole idea of it is this is stupid, right? They're already way back here and then have to overcome all that just to do your silly little word problem so that they can get the grade that you want them to have, right? So when we talk about equity in education, it can be an inequitable situation happening even if both students are sitting in the same classroom with the quote same resources available to them in the moment.
So check this out. So it's in one of my workshops. It's a quote by Dr. Helen Immordino Yang. She is and I need to be clear on this, she is a neuroscience professor at that other school across town. So for the listeners, I went to UCLA. So it is commonly referred to as the University of Southern California, but some of us call it the University of Spoiled Children. But
hey, when I was at Cal, we used to wave our keys when they were playing.
So we used to wave $5 bills.
I can't say on air what we would say to y'all though.
But in all seriousness, so there's a couple of things. One, she was an 8th grade science teacher. And then she got her doctorate and she's a neuroscience professor. And that's her quote, one of her quotes from her research. It is neurobiologically impossible to think deeply about things you don't care about. And so you just go ahead.
So because you weren't on for the pre-show that we were having earlier, I literally, number one, I was talking about this because I used this quote in one of my keynotes.
Oh, good.
And we were talking about when sometimes when you stare at a word, you're like, uh-oh, I got to say that one right now. That was the word.
Neurobiologically impossible. Yes. But to the point, going back to the C conversation, when introducing a concept that involves some sort of a narrative, okay, so like word problems technically to me are narratives for math. Okay, because you have to tell a story, a little bit of a story that includes some sort of numerical calculation to it. The first question to ask students is to have a conversation around what part of this do you understand in your own lived context before you even get into solving it. Because what you will find is by engaging that conversation, it will serve one of two purposes. You'll either realize that the way the word problem has been written, it is not culturally accessible, or by engaging in the conversation before you jump right to solving the problem, which, by the way, is going to fit with the P that we're going to do. It helps students draw some sort of a relevant lived connection to the problem. So for me, like what you just said with that, my first thing would be like, okay, let's do it this way. First of all, how many of you have ever had candy before? Okay, great. How many of you ever had candy? Like for me growing up, I had now laters. Okay, which the funny thing is they're called now and later, but we used to call them now a later. Now later. Yeah, just mix it all into one. And here's one. So for anybody who grew up at these, literally the name of the candy was eat some now, eat some later.
Man, we smashing that whole little pack right there.
Thing. That rock hard candy you can take a hammer to. But
sour apple, watermelon.
I would tell the whole story of like, I used to go to the store and I would buy some now laters and I remember a candy bar called whatchamacallit, and people are like, what's the name of it? It's like whatchamacallit. Like, you don't know the name? And that was a commercial. But the whole point though, is that you're framing this word problem within the context of a lived experience.
And there's actually the opportunity, right?
That's got to be the conversation though. You can't have the opportunity if you don't have the conversation.
No, that's true. That's true. But if you talk to that purpose of it, and if it's what we're actually doing right now, like if your students could actually help you rewrite your textbook and we're going to be critical of this book. We're going to intentionally be critical of the examples that it uses, the word uses that it has, the language, like all of the cultural affiliations that are foreign to me. We're going to be critical of it on purpose. And in doing so, we actually can reform what this content is for our peers. Our students can actually see purpose in that. I used to see that happen regularly, even on the lightweight scale of just saying, you know what, we're trying something new. And I would try that first block and get feedback from the kids. Next thing you know it, making modifications, second block, trying it, getting more, and being straight up with them. Like, hey, y'all are helping me make this better for next block. I appreciate it. They didn't see it as, man, I ain't trying to make something easier for them. They're like, okay, they would lean in and work on it because they saw it as, this is something I can do. I can actually take something that's terrible and make it better, including your whack lessons sometimes, Mr.
Yeah, and I would argue, here's my contention, by doing exactly what you just shared, that's rigor to me. That's rigor.
Straight up.
Because what usually happens, most people associate rigor with volume, and that actually is not what it is. So I'll share with our audience, here's how I define rigor: increasing complexity relative to the content. So taking that word problem you just shared, my first thing is, one, tell the story of how I consume candy and all those sorts of things. Then I'd say, okay, our task, before we even get into solving the problem, how might we rewrite this problem to where it's something that you all can connect to right away? Then we'll get into the mathematical part. Okay, I want to do that. Look at Nadia. Don't even get me started on rigor. Nadia and I have had so many conversations about all this. Like I said, the jazzy jargon taken out of context.
Yo, rigor sounds too much like rigor mortis to me. So
because it does kill you.
I'm good. I'm good
kill
on
you
that.
with volume. Exactly.
I'm good on that.
So I mean, I'm hoping you all are watching and listening. Like what Dee and I generally do is we look at some of our what I call cultural norms, and we start to interrogate them, because there's a reason why you can look at the predictability of experience and outcomes. And until we start naming a problem for what it is, you can't solve it. And by the way, that is a problem, not a puzzle. Now, Dee, you didn't do it, but you got to share. Oh, she said, say that again. Rigor, I define it as simply increasing the complexity relative to the content. So I'll give you all an example. So the word problem that Dee read around the, read it again real quick, Dee, and because this is important for me to.
Okay. And to speak to what you were asking me to share out, because this is actually a little piece that I wrote. I think I wrote it as a blog and I put it in a couple of other places, but it's called Puzzle or Problem.
Yeah, right? I remember that. Yes.
So go ahead. No, I'm letting it be known. Oftentimes math teachers, because math instruction oftentimes has these activity sets that are defined as math problems. And I'm like, definition of problem: a matter or situation regarded as unwelcome or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. This ain't a problem. This is a puzzle. If it's something that there is an answer that's definitive and all you have to do is solve it in order to escape the room, that's a puzzle. That is not problem solving. It's maybe skills that are necessary in order to actually problem solve, but let's define them properly. So the question is, Brad has 500 pieces of candy. 295 of them are red. The rest are green. How many green pieces of candy does Brad have?
Okay, so here's how I would apply rigor to that. First, I share with my student, I grew up eating lots of candy. In fact, one of my favorite things to do for Halloween was with my friends, we would identify which houses were giving out full-size candy bars versus the little snack size thing. Yeah. So, and then when we would have all our candy, we would pour it all in the middle of a floor, and we would play a game where you would see who has what of what. I go, so technically what we were doing, because we would count it and we would look at the volume of the number of pieces of candy we had, and then the sizes of the candy we had. So you see, we were doing math even in our youth in context with Halloween. So there. So now you have that. Now the next question that I would consider asking a student is, if you haven't consumed candy or you can't quite connect to it, have you ever been in a situation where you get more than one representation of something and it's not an even number? So it could be even something as simple as a glass of water that's only half full. It's only 50%. And so my whole point is I would have dialogue around that. I would encourage the students to, if the problem isn't quite connecting to it, how might we rewrite it so that we can connect to it? Once they have connected to it, now what other problems might we design that are relevant to you that involve a similar mathematical calculation? You see what I just did there? That's rigor. We started off with something simplistic, and then we just worked our way up to increase the complexity of it. But if you'll notice, all of it was more around me asking the right questions, which serves as a degree of learner empowerment. So as the students begin to work on the problem, if you will, either it's in its origination or a derivative of it, we're now taking that and now we're going to apply it to a whole lot of other things.
Yep. No, that's
how
straight
I
up.
Rigor. And by the way, that's also differentiation embedded in that process.
Without a doubt. No, without a doubt. Okay, so I know we need to
social studies, science, all of it.
I know we need to transition here, and this is what we normally do, right? We normally make our last segment. Sometimes it's more condensed because we had to really get in on the second one. Just to wrap this up, because I also think about like the whole guess the amount of candy pieces in the jar, and whoever guesses the amount can get the jar of candy. And I'm like, what's the point? What's the point? So I even said on that, like, though it's fun, it's challenging, it's not really a problem. Knowing how many pieces of candy in a jar is no one's pain point. I'll pass. This is not a problem, but rather a puzzle. Puzzles are fine, but I want my children to grow up to become problem solvers, not puzzle playing participants. One of these things is not the other. So let's keep it moving on the puzzle stuff.
And you know what? And let me share with you all something that how you know that that's a game and it's a puzzle. I remember going to different establishments where they would have like, guess how many of blank is in the jar? You know how you can make an educated guess? And they wouldn't let me do it. That's how you know it's a game. What I said is, how many people have guessed already? And there'd be some number. Ideally, it's a large number. And I would say, then can I see all of the previous guesses? You see where I'm going with this, okay?
Yeah,
okay, great. You're telling me to guess how many pieces of candy are in a jar. Let's say you've had 100 submissions so far. I want to see all 100. And then what I'm going to do, see, again, like you said, it's a puzzle, not a problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the what you call it, the mean of all of those. And then that's the number I'm going to guess. And I remember reading something about it where when you do that, you increase significantly the likelihood that you are going to be much closer to the correct answer. Because what are you doing? And this is going to tie in with what we're going to shift to. What am I doing? I'm tapping into all of the intellectual capital of everybody who's guessed. And then now I'm using that to further inform me before I come up with a response. And this is why I always share with folks, you want your learning environments to be cooperative, not competitive. Why not? We are sometimes our best resource, but yet what is the one thing that happens in education? You have to do things in isolation. And that ties in with the T, which goes to tracking. Because the minute you create a hierarchy and track, you are now labeling and isolating students, and you're not getting what I call a cooperative learning environment or a learning culture at all.
Not at all.
Guess what one of the first things that is used for tracking with students is? And there comes my shout out to Nadia.
I don't know which word you after, so go.
Grades.
Well, yes. I thought this was a trick question because
it's not a trick question. Grades.
Because I'm so used to our traditional education system. There had to be a trick question in there. I needed to read the question four different ways.
Nope.
Look at the options. Yeah, no, absolutely, of course.
Nadia did a session. Hat tip to Nadia. She's my buddy, my writing partner. We also wrote a 4-part medium series on grading. That is one of the first. That is probably not necessarily the first, but that if you were to look at tracking and what I would call school segregation, that's probably the single most factor that is used to do both of those things. And so then, of course, what happens? You get your high performing. Okay, we could even examine that, but high performing students based on grades, which grades are exploitative, capitalistic, racist, and nothing more than a sorting and stratification system. And so you have the high performing students. And then the quote unquote, that's an even better way to put it. It creates a caste system in education.
Oh yeah, it makes it predictable.
Tracking
Makes it predictable. Yo, just the word tracking. This takes me to so many different places, and so you and I are cool with this. But for our audience, like, let me go on a quick tangent. So number one, when you utilize the word equity and you come up with an image, and of course that one image that's been out there,
boxes,
with the boxes, and that's been
get out of here with that.
Yeah, and here's the one thing, like I've seen multiple attempts at like improving that image, right? So whether it's the fence is gone, or even the people are participating in the game, right? And I think all in all, we're always trying to reform what was a bad analogy from jump. And I'm like, why? Again, we always want to dismantle, but we want to disrupt. Sorry, we want to disrupt, but we don't want to dismantle, demolish, and maybe rebuild something new. The image that comes to mind for me is actually happening right now, and that's track and field. And I always think about the 400 meter. All right, so this is my favorite example, my absolute favorite example of
which both you and I ran it.
Yes. The best way to explain how equity really happens, and that is that if you understand, the circumference of the track, and you understand that anyone who's on the inside lane is running less, right? They are running a full 400 meters in comparison to someone else. The farther out they're actually running more. And so if you want to look at a different way to diagram equity, I say it's understanding that from start point, it may look like, oh, that's unfair. Why are they given that advantage of being way out in the front?
There, yeah. Lane
nine. Right. Why are they given that advantage of being up there? And it's like, no, you don't understand how distance works. Right. And so that is a better analogy for it. It would be inequitable, though it would be called fair if everyone had the same starting place. But that's to understand that people who are on the outside are literally having to run a longer distance. The crazy thing how tracking works oftentimes is it does that by design, right? Mm-hmm. It basically says some people have the inside lane, others have the outside lane, but we're going to give you the same, there's no staggered distance here.
Oh, there's no stagger. That's right.
But it's fair. And from our vantage point,
it's fair. Everyone's at the same starting line.
We're not.
No. And like I said, what Nadia and I did with that writing, which shout out to Nadia again, it was such a privilege to be able to be a thought partner with her and do our writing together. Is you really have to ask yourself what, and let me back up a little bit. That whole graphic. So I know exactly which graphic you're talking about. There's equality where everyone's below the fence. There's equity where you get your boxes, you can see over the fence. I've always told people the flaw with that design is the fence itself, because the fence to me represents the system. But then there's one where the fence is removed, but they're still standing in the same spot. Okay. Now, my main thing with that whole thing is, even in terms of things like what Nadia and I examined with grading, you have to ask yourself, what are some of our institutionalized and systemic policies first that lead to the predictability of outcomes? And further to that point, what I don't like about the graphic, and quite frankly, I would actually argue might be a similar, I won't say I take issue, but it's similar to your example. My whole thing is not whether you start at the starting line or whether you're staggered. I want to know who designed the track. What do you have? What were you provided in preparation before you set foot on the track? You know what I'm saying? Like we spend a lot of time in education. Here's one for you all. And I encourage everyone watching the rules. Who determines the rules? See where I'm going bigger picture here. For all of you, here's the thing that I would encourage you to consider. And I will add an asterisk that once you see it for what it is, it does come with a degree of a burden. But we're called the Liberated Educator for a reason. And in some cases, we got to break free of that chain. Look at how much is pushed, promoted, and propagated in education that places such a high degree of responsibility on the individual without ever interrogating any of the system. There's no interrogation of policy. There's no interrogation of practice. All of these things that exist, which is why Nadia and I, for example, we're writing on grades, because it's like, I don't want to talk about opportunity gaps or achievement gaps, because ultimately those still operate within the guardrails of you're going to get a grade. When the problem is that grade, then we could get to all these other things on how you evaluate learning and things like that. But
no doubt.
Again, using your analogy, I agree with you as far as, looking at distance and considering the staggering. But for me, I'm like, okay, first of all, why would you design a track like that? What are the rules that are set? What are the runners in this case coming into the race with? And why does it have to be a zero-sum game? Why not have it to where, everyone starts, everyone moves at the same pace, everyone finishes? This is learning. Track, to use your point, yeah, that's competition. Well, guess what?
Right.
There's other things that are specifically designed for competition. Learning should not be one of them.
I'm with you. There is no arguments coming out of my mouth on that point at all. Yeah, I have to do some homework. I need to look up who was I want to say it was my 7th grade guidance counselor. Because shout out to her. I do not remember her name. She's definitely the most influential person in my educational setup, because she understood tracking. I didn't. And I remember, because I was bussed out to school. I was in Woodland Hills, and she's looking at my grades, looking at the comments, looking at stuff. And she said, I'm like C or D student in most of my stuff. And she said, I see here in elementary school, 5th grade, that you loved science. I said, yep. She said, well, I'm looking at your transcripts now, looking at the notes, and they say that you talk a lot and you have a C in science. And you talk too much. You're always talking in class. I said, yes. I'm thinking it's all a setup. I'm in trouble again. That's why I'm talking to my guidance counselor. She said, you know what? I'm going to move you to honors English. What? So I got a C. And she said, I'm going to move you to honors.
Wow.
And it was because she recognized, you know what? In the honors class, you're allowed to talk. In the honors class, you're expected to talk, bringing it back to conversation. And that moment of me being moved to an honors class revolutionized my entire experience in school. And the next thing you know it, I was taking all honors classes and all AP classes. Why? Because I could talk. And I could work things out in a community where all of a sudden the setup of the classroom was different. We got circles. We're talking about the text. We're getting, and I'm like, all my other classes, we're expected to literally sit quiet with our hands on our desk and listen or take notes.
I know we got to wind down. I've got to point out 2 things. Like, number one, what Nadia and I talked about, were you marked down as a C because you weren't compliant, which is a non-academic factor? First of all, let's talk about that. Okay. Teacher, I'm going to assert power and over you, student. You talk too much, so I'm going to penalize you with the one thing that I can do, your grade. Not represent. And to me, it's like, okay, first of all, if he likes to talk too much, which I don't even know that that's such a thing, to be honest with you. If that
I talk for a living now. Shout out to all those teachers. Shout out to all those teachers who try to mark me down for talking too much.
When I had students that talk too much, I was like, okay, you like to talk. How might we utilize that to support your learning and the learning of your classmates? I don't need to be the one doing all the talking. I don't even want to be the one doing all the talking. And I remember I was accused by a teacher, real story, true story, in high school, literally the following. It was one of my social studies teachers. It was like, you know what, Shelton, you just talk too much. You better hope you get a job at one point where you get paid to talk for a living. You better believe after I did my very first keynote, I was like, I'm going to see if this teacher's still around. Because boy, do I have something to say to you. You tried to traumatize me, and you wanted me to carry a scar for my life. And I'm like, I got something to share with you now. Like, no. Nice try.
Fire. Use that for fire.
Oh, anyway, man, I appreciate you sharing that story. And you know what? As we conclude, for all of you watching, Dee's story points to 2 things. One is Ideally, you can be the catalyst for learners identifying something that they are good at and that they are passionate about and that they enjoy. And ideally, it will work within the context of your curricular area. And then major props to that counselor who is like, not only do I see excellence in you, but I'm going to put you in the classes where you can realize your full potential. Don't we want that for all of our learners?
Yep. Again, see, you'll see how that works. We need to have the sound bite because he just dropped another bomb.
So anyway, if we do that for all of our learners and ourselves, guess what you then become? A liberated educator.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a shirt.
Yeah.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for witnessing the first live recording of the Liberated Educator Podcast. I usually come on at the very end of the podcast and do my radio voice, my DJ voice, my slow jam voice to wrap it all up. We thank you guys for listening and
your
watching.
90s R&B voice.
There you go. There you go. Bringing it back. As we promised, we will give some giveaways for listening and watching. We appreciate your support. Please make sure you go to the Liberated Educator Podcast and listen to previous episodes. We will be back with the next set of episodes next week with Monica Martinez. And who we got next?
You blanked out. You blanked out. We gotta have Nadia back now. We gotta talk about this.
Gotta have our Nadia back, but you know, I was gonna see
yes,
if
we
I
can
was
talk
seeing if
about
y'all
our
knew.
writing series. Yes.
Yep.
We got our sister Victoria Thompson coming back.
Oh, yay.
Victorious.
Victorious. That's right.
Absolutely. So as we said, though, if you actually put in the hashtag right now, Rocksnard, hashtag Rocksnard, we will be giving away 3 things. We're giving away a gift card to Chevron. We know how important gas is at the moment. $50 gift card to Chevron. We're also giving away a Chromebook, an Acer Chromebook, an Acer tablet, and we're actually giving away some Starbucks gift card as well. How about that? We're actually giving away 4. Is that good with y'all? And no, Ken and D, you cannot enter.
Dang it.
I don't drink Starbucks and I drive an electric car.
Oh, my bad.
So I'm good.
My bad. Excuse me.
And by the way, I'm going to give this is a not a shameless, this is an intentional plug. D roasts his own coffee. So he don't even fool with Starbucks. So there, we need to come up with a Liberated Educator roast.
We can't be banging on the giveaway right now.
I know, man.
No, I know.
Some folks do. All right, real quick. So here we go. First winner. Oh, Jay's in there. Jay, you got to get out of there. How about you end up winning?
The odds are pretty good.
Ooh, Jen, you just got that Acer Chromebook.
Yeah.
Jen, hi. I haven't seen you. It's been a while. Been a minute.
I know that's nothing to frown upon. Jen is our winner of the Chromebook. How about that?
She's just got a Chromebook up in here.
Yeah.
What?
Jay, you see that? Jay's got to go for the next session, but that's all good. So Jen's got the Chromebook. Let's hear. Let's do another winner here. And this is for the the Acer tablet. How about that? We give away the Acer tablet. How's Jen back in here?
Colleen, that's what's up. Hey, her comments have been fire as well.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good.
Thank you.
Definitely appreciate that. All right, how about we do this? We give the $50 Chevron card and the $10 Starbucks cards to the same person. Y'all cool with that? All right, last one.
I love it. Chevron and Starbucks. You ever had any gas station coffee to go with your gas station hot dog?
Got a pretzel.
Hey.
The gas station, though.
And there's Heidi. Heidi,
Yes.
you are the winner of the... Didn't Heidi win in the first show? Heidi is racking it up. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we do appreciate once again your full support of the Liberated Educator Podcast. Like I said, go to the Liberated Educator Podcast and you'll be able, actually just do the hashtag on Twitter. You'll be able to get the links to the episodes that we have. Currently ending season 1, going into season 2 in the fall. Any parting shouts? Parting words, D and Ken.
Yeah, my parting words is just simply thank you all for being here. Continue to be you. Let's continue to uplift each other. Let's continue to grow. And to borrow the quote from one of my personal heroes, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better.
Do better. Look, man, like I said, Ken always has the bombs to drop. I'm good on all of this. I love the interaction. I feel like we should do this again. We need to do the same format again. Y'all give us energy. Appreciate you being live in the comments and adding to the conversation, which was not only our first segment, but our full segment. So appreciate you.
All right. With that being said, we'll see y'all next time.